This is the story of an ambitious and community-focused individual who has dedicated his life to improving social justice and equity. After graduating from CSU Dominguez Hills with a degree in negotiation, resolution, and peace building, he went on to work for the California State Legislature in 2015, where he wrote and crafted laws meant to promote a safer and more just world. This is the story of Aubrey Rodriguez. Aubrey, welcome to the show.
Thanks, John Lincoln. I appreciate it.
Of course. So now let's begin with your background. Could you please describe your early life?
My early life.
Yes,
Oh,
like your
wow.
childhood.
Okay. Yeah. I grew up primarily in SoCal, in Anaheim, California. Prior to that, though, I lived in like Oklahoma, for a few years where my dad's from. And thankfully, I did not grow up there. It's a different place than California. I love California. My mom's from California. My parents got divorced when I was like 4 years old. They're really good friends now, but she wanted to come back to California and moved out here. My dad followed, thankfully. So I was born in Long Beach too, so I do have California roots in that way. And then yeah, I mean, and my dad lived in like Bellflower, Signal Hill, which is like near Long Beach, parts of LA. My mom lived in Anaheim. We also lived in Bellflower, and yeah, so I got a little both taste of both LA, Orange County. So I claim LA a bit, but I primarily grew up in Anaheim. And
Mhm.
yeah, I went to like Sycamore Junior High, Anaheim High School, and graduated from there and went to college at San Francisco State before graduating at Cal State Dominguez Hills, when I came back down to SoCal to finish my degree. But yeah, SoCal is a special place in my heart. I love SoCal.
Nice. Well, when you were in high school or even earlier, were you interested in crafting policies like you do right now?
Not at all. No, I was not. I don't know what a state assembly was, really, or state senate. Yeah, I was not interested in crafting policy. I was a much different person when I was your age. I was I kind of self-described as like a libertarian. I was a little more conservative, even though I wasn't very political. But I was just kind of regurgitated what my parents like kind of taught me. I didn't really kind of think for myself too much. And when I was in high school, I really wanted to be like a sports therapist, or like physical therapist for like, I don't know, like the 49ers. That was like my dream job. So I remember I declared my major for kinesiology, and my main motive for going to school was primarily for like money, not necessarily like an education. But then in the United States, we have general ed requirements, which I used to hate. Because I think the UK, other parts of Europe, they don't have general ed requirements. When you're an adult, so you get to just choose your classes. But here in the States, they require you to take a history or whatever major you declare for. In high school, I hated history. But then like having to take it, I fell in love with history, and it really kind of opened my eyes to like, I don't know, different outlook of how to view history in our past and social movements. And that got me interested in working more on like policy and like seeing the social change. So it was actually really nice. And I mean, I got like a C in my biology class, like a science class. Like my brain wasn't just right for like the sciences. So I mean, that was more of the humanities, and that helped me like being able to critical think or being a critical thinker, which I think college is really useful for. Ideally, it should be happening in high school, but my high school was underfunded. We were much better at funding education now, but when I was in high school, it was during the Great Recession. It was not a good time for schools. And it really showed. But like, yeah, thankfully in college, I did a whole 180. I graduated like summa cum laude and like did really well in college and really liked it. I also got to start classes at like 10 a.m., which I think was a huge help because I'm not a morning person. Our world operates around morning people, though. That's just the way it is. Because yeah, but yeah, my brain I felt like functioned better later in the morning, and yeah, we passed a law actually to start school earliest at like 8:30. because some schools were starting like at 7:30, like super early. We did exempt like rural areas of the state just because I don't know, they're different. So, but yeah, it's good to start later because not all of our brains can function that early, right?
Yeah, that is an interesting point. Like for me at
Mhm.
my school, many sports start at 7 o'clock or even earlier.
And it's way too
So,
early. It's not good. I mean, and not to say it's not, I mean, maybe you're like a morning person and you could operate that way, but for most students, like the science says opposite. Like our brains just don't function well that early. Even if you try to go to bed early, things like that, it's just like it's way too early to start going to school or but yeah, I had a zero period. I remember being in zero period and like PE and having to run a mile at like 7 a.m. It's just like that was way too much. But zero period was optional too. Although I had to do because I wanted to take like yearbook and I was in sports and all this stuff. So I kind of did that to myself. But yeah, 7 a.m. is way too early
yeah.
to start school. I would never. So
Well, going back to your college experience, what do you think caused this dramatic change in your view and liking towards history?
yeah, so my high school professor, I took AP history without taking the test, um, which doesn't make any sense. But my teacher was very monotone. Just wasn't very didn't really like it wasn't excited about the topic he was teaching. It's probably a little checked out, which you know it happens to people. People go through their own things in life and but it did have an effect where I just thought history was pointless. Thought it was really boring. I didn't understand why we had to learn our history, and I had a very jaded view. But then going to college and having a professor who was actually like passionate about it really helped open my eyes. I also took ethnic studies courses there, which San Francisco State University founded ethnic studies in the 70s. So there's a history with ethnic studies at that campus, and it really showed through the faculty. And that just kind of really opened my eyes as to why history is so important, you know, and learning about why things are the way they are today. And I'm very passionate about history. I actually minored in history. I also double minored in poli-sci, which is silly to double minor. But I graduated with like 150 units. It's kind of funny because I hated school in high school and I thought it was kind of annoying and stupid. And I just went to college again for money. But then it just helped me do a 180, just like wanting to learn and expand my mind and learn about our past. Like, I don't know, it was really nice. Just having like passionate faculty makes a huge difference and helps like students and younger people as their minds are developing to like kind of reorient themselves to education, why it's important and why it can be a tool for us to grow ourselves and really kind of be more aware and honestly like yeah more symbiotic like have a more symbiotic relationship with the world around us. It's a very beautiful thing. I love education now. And now I'm going to grad school, you know, because my work-life balance is a bit better. It's a commitment, but again, I love school and like I'm getting a master's in public policy administration. And yeah, it's a great tool to help us again, like kind of work on our minds to help expand it and just be like critical thinkers. We need more critical thinkers. It's good to be a critical thinker in today's world.
Yeah, well, I definitely agree with your point that faculty can either make or break your experience with education. Like some people who don't like history, I'm not sure who said this, but someone said about history, it's just one damn fact after another. So a lot of people don't really care at all. Um, but you said that you mentioned your ethnic studies class kind of opened your
Mhm.
eyes. Could you dive
Yeah.
deeper into what exactly you learned in that class?
Yeah. So in that class, I remember it just helped me like kind of learn more. We talked about the slave trade a lot more, like from a different lens. I felt like then than like our current like when I was in high school, and we passed a law in California to help like reshape our education curriculum, and now we're requiring ethnic studies to graduate, which I think is a very good thing. It was controversial, and it has been. And I mean, in other states like Arizona, they actually passed a law to not even teach Chicano studies because they don't want people learning about Mexican history, for instance, right? Because they think it separates people and like kind of creates like these racial divides. Whereas like when I learned it at SF State, I felt like I was learning the actual true history and not like a whitewashed version that you typically get. And in California, we're embracing that a bit more. We're trying to change like that conversation in our schools because we don't want a whitewashed history that we have been taught. And it can impact people the way they view the country and just view people in general. Like it's true. And that's why some people may like try to work against it, saying it's like brainwashing people or whatever it is. But if you think about our current ed system or like the curriculum in all these other schools, that is a way of like kind of almost brainwashing people. So we want to make sure we have an accurate reflection. And when I was in an ethnic studies course, it felt more accurate to what happened in our past. And then it tried to like say like, I don't know, oh, some bad things happen. Like we actually talked about specific things that happen. And we talked about like black codes and all this stuff. So yeah, it's just an important part of our history that, and then it could help open people's eyes and, make them just like, again, like create more, be like critical, more critical thinkers about what we are, like why things are the way they are today and these systems. Like institutional racism is brought up, which a lot of people kind of classify as critical race theory. And a lot of conservatives don't like that. Again, then they hate like critical race theory, even though they can't explain what it is a lot of times because they think it's just like a farce, something that's made up. But we have these systems in place that, are impacting a lot of people, communities of color today. Like that bill I worked on in the legislature, I mentioned earlier, before we started recording, the abolishing firearm enhancements. Like that's a relic of institutional racism. And what firearm enhancements are is if you commit a crime, you have a gun, and it can be loaded, it cannot be loaded. Just having a gun to intimidate someone, you get an automatic enhancement to whatever crime you committed, regardless of what you did. If you hurt someone, they add however many years to your sentence. Enhancements don't work. The science shows that like it does not deter crime. A lot of people who commit crimes don't look up the law and say, "Oh, is there an enhancement if I do X, Y, Z?" It's really silly. So enhancements, and they take a lot of uh, powers away from the judges and like judicial discretion. It makes no sense. It's just a legislature kind of trying to enhance penalties because they don't agree with what they did. But anyways, it's a relic of institutional racism because 90% of people who are impacted by firearm enhancements are communities of color. And like that's like a relic of institutional racism. So yeah, it's just in our systems today, in our society and our laws.
Hold on, I'm a bit confused. So you said it applies to people who commit a crime and have a gun that's loaded? Is that what you
It can
said?
be loaded, not loaded. So it's like some people have an unloaded gun just to intimidate people because they don't have the intention of shooting someone. They just want to intimidate. If someone has a gun, right, and they're pointing it at you, like most of the time you're going to give them whatever they want because the person's thought is like, oh, they are going to shoot me. But there are instances where it's not loaded, and not to say that what they're doing is fine or good, right? But it's just kind of like it's insane that there's an automatic enhancement without understanding the situation either, that the judge can't do anything in their domain to like, I don't know, have the actual sentencing that they want to impose. Like they're forced to impose a higher sentencing automatically. So taking away the discretion, we have our separation of powers. We have the executive, the legislative branch, and then we have the judicial branch. And like the legislative branch is meddling in the judicial branch when it has these enhancements, and it's taking away power from the judicial, right? The judiciary. So it's just kind of like that, at least what we learned in grade school and the separation of powers like that, it does violate that whole premise of separation of powers.
So how exactly does this disproportionately affect communities of color?
So 90% of people who are guilty of like or have received these enhancements are communities of color. And that disproportionality in itself is what creates like a racist policy. And it is a relic of institutional racism. And same with gang enhancements. Gang enhancements is the most commonly used enhancement tool. And it's just like depending if they're affiliated with any gang, they get an automatic enhancement just because of who they affiliate with. I don't know the numbers there of like the percentage of community because I only worked on the firearm enhancement bill. But again, it's like you have these enhancements. It's like people should be like if they commit a crime, that's what they should receive. They're going to receive a sentence for that. But to take it away from the actual like judge makes no sense. So it's just like let the judge determine that. That's what their role is in this whole system. That the legislature should not be meddling in and trying to impose automatic sentencing for crimes committed when they determine what crimes are, right? They could say like I don't know, doing these drugs is a crime or whatever it is, but they shouldn't be like imposing an automatic sentence because there's a case by case basis, right? But like when you have a lot of communities of color committing certain crimes, being affiliated with gangs, having like illegal firearms and using it in the commission of whatever crime they do, that's when it becomes a racist policy. And that's more of a critical race theory perspective, right? And that's what conservatives don't like. But it's just looking at the numbers and understanding the history of these policies.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I haven't heard about that before. So, after you finished college, what experiences led you to work in the California State Assembly?
Yeah. Well, so yeah, well, I changed my degree like 5 times, and this is not a hyperbolic statement. Like, well, after kinesiology, that was my first declared major. I went to history, and then from history, I went to philosophy. And then from philosophy, I really wanted to do astronomy or become like an astrophysicist. But then and ultimately, obviously, I ended up with the negotiation, conflict resolution, peace building, which is an interdisciplinary degree. It's like peace studies. Um, and what led me to like kind of changing my degree so much, I mean, I was just a college kid trying to figure out what I was really passionate about. And I was so interested in learning about all these different fields. But yeah, like understanding what our politics are today, like when I saw the military budget versus NASA's budget, as I was trying to wanting to become an astrophysicist, it upset me so much. At the time, like NASA had a $20 billion budget and the military's at 700 billion. So yeah, it's just like that disproportionality made me very upset as a human, 'cause where we're prioritizing like war and death over knowledge, right? Trying to expand our horizons into the unknown universe. That got me really into policy and politics. And then I was in this program called the Panetta Institute, and it's a congressional internship program where I went to DC for 3 months, and I got to intern for a Congress member there. Leon Panetta, he's a former secretary of the CIA, and even Secretary of Defense. He's very mod legislator. He was a very moderate like Congress member. My politics didn't really align with him, but he has a great program where he gives like young students from each of the Cal states the opportunity to go to DC for 3 months. And it was a great program, and that helped me like expose myself to that world. And I worked for Congressmember Barbara Lee, who ran for Senate. She lost, unfortunately, but now she's mayor of Oakland. She's a really good member. She was the only Congress member to vote against the authorization to go into Afghanistan after the two towers fell in '01, way before you were born, which is wild. I was in the third grade when that happened. But yeah, I was like 434 members voted for that authorization to go into Afghanistan, even Bernie Sanders. But she was the only member to vote against it, which is like, yeah, and she's on the right side of history. Again, some people have different perspectives on that. I have my biases, but yeah, it's just kind of insane that authorized to go and deploy military forces the day after that happened. Um, but it is what it is. It's just our government. But anyways, that program helped me get to like learn the world of policymaking in DC. And initially I thought I was going to be a DC worker because I'm like, oh, this is where everything's happening. Very passionate about like foreign policy. But then I came and interned for Alan Lowenthal in the Congress and the district office, and then eventually went to a district office for Tom Daley, who I ended up working for. And I got to learn more about California policy. And we do a lot more. I mean, Congress does a lot more in the foreign space, right? International affairs, and they have a much bigger budget. They have a lot more influence in the world. But domestic policy, in DC, the mantra is like states' rights, states' rights, states' rights, like a lot of people's attitude toward policy making. So in California, we have our states' rights, and we get to do a lot more policy making and be more experimental with it there's like a justice on the Supreme Court, I forget his name, but he talked about how states and state legislatures are basically like uh they get to experiment. They're like lab making for these types of policies. And if they work in the states for however many years, decades, it eventually percolates across the country. Or DC can also try to impose something nationwide. So we're kind of on the front lines of being more experimental in our domestic policy. And that interested me in like the state legislature, where I eventually got the job with Tom Dealey as a field rep. And then I helped Connie Petrie Norris get elected down in Orange County in 2018. And she brought me up as a legislative aide to Sacramento. And that's where I got to really start working on policy. I was given a bill right away and like working on multiple bills, giving policy recommendations, and it was really fun. Whereas in DC, it's a different culture because a lot of these members they introduce bills that sits in committee forever. There's so much. I mean, there's politics also in our legislature, but it's like politics to the max over there, and it's based on seniority, the personality of your member. There's so many factors, but like in the legislature in California, you introduce a bill, it goes through the process, especially if you're in the major and the majority party, which only works for Democrats and I would never work for a Republican. But yeah, so yeah, that's how I kind of got my foot in the door and got to working in the legislature.
I think you briefly mentioned, but can you please restate some of the laws that you worked on in these early years when you were working for, these other people that you interned or the people
Mhm.
like you said, got your foot in the door?
Okay, yeah. Well, so like when I was an intern, so I didn't get to really work on bills when I was an intern in Congress. But I did get to get exposed to that world and I went to a bunch of hearings and it was really fun. I actually got more optimistic about our government, which is funny because people usually get more pessimistic. But there's a lot of conversations happening in DC that I just didn't think was happening from the outside because they have so many hearings and briefings. And I remember attending those and being excited about the conversations that were actually taking place because I just didn't think they were talking like that at they call it the Hill. Um, but yeah, I mean, when I was a ledge aide, my first bill I worked on was trying to get money for green infrastructure. And it was AB 65 back in 2019. That was my first bill ever. And it was kind of like a minor bill. It didn't do a whole lot, but I got to redefine green infrastructure. And I worked with like the Sierra Club to update that definition. Because initially we weren't even going to touch the definition. But I was talking to someone at the Sierra Club and they say, oh, this is a good opportunity to kind of redefine what green infrastructure is. And green infrastructure basically is trying to like have tree canopies in the streets or having like foliage on buildings, things like that. And it's really interesting to help kind of improve the infrastructure we have in our cities to kind of combat like the climate crisis, right? With like the sun getting hotter, things like that. Green infrastructure is great. I think it's Singapore or some other country where they've really incorporated green infrastructure. Like if you take away green space in that city, like you have to replace it somehow in the building you're erecting there. And I think it is Singapore. I may be wrong on that, but yeah, green infrastructure is the future. It costs money, so that's why we don't see it everywhere. But it's going to be a way we kind of help adapt to our worsening climate. It's one of the ways we're going to do it. It's not the only way, but yeah, it's our future. And that was a fun first bill to work on.
Yeah, that does sound like fun. Can you explain the degree to which you think green infrastructure can help combat climate change?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say it's like the biggest thing we can do, but usually if you have like, I mean, in California, in Sacramento, we call ourselves the city of trees. They changed the name to Farm to Fort Capital, which I wholeheartedly disagree with. We should remain the city of trees. So a lot of us who live here still call it the city of trees. But that's for a form of green infrastructure. Growing up in SoCal, we had a lot of palm trees that aren't even native to Southern California. They're just kind of planted everywhere. But here you have a lot of tree canopies, and it provides shade. And it gets hot in Sacramento. We're in the valley, and that helps people being able to be outside and doesn't like heat up. We have black asphalt that absorbs the sun, so like it does make it hotter. So there's a way like they paint white streets, which will be kind of odd to everyone driving, but it helps reflect the sun and it keeps it cooler. And you don't have to, and you have that, if you have like green foliage on your buildings, it will have people use less energy to like kind of cool their houses. And that could help our grids, which your sister knows a lot about, the energy grids, because we can't be over um, extending that, right? So that helps with cleaner energy or not using as much dirty fuels to with our grid system. But it's like it's a part of the equation. It's not the largest part of what we can do with the climate crisis. So
Okay.
it helps
Um,
us mitigate it.
what was that?
It helps us mitigate it.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. You also mentioned how your expectations of how DC politics functioned really was different from the reality of how it functioned. Could you please provide more specific examples of the differences in your expectations versus the reality?
Yeah, well, so the function part, I think maybe met my real like expectation because I mean they just don't do a whole lot, and now they're in a shutdown, right? Like it's just I don't think they've gotten out of it. So there's a lot of dysfunctionality there, and a lot of ego. We have that in California too. It's not, I mean, if you run for office as a politician, you have to have some sort of ego, right? Whereas like George Washington, he's our first president, didn't want the office, and he like famously said like people who seek they shouldn't seek the office to be changed. There's something where he talks about people not wanting like seek office or like the better people to be a leader, right? That's just not how our system is today. Like everyone's seeking office, they have a huge ego, but they a lot of it, some people do it for good reasons, right? And they feel like they're doing it for a certain cause, and there's that. But a lot of people just have a big ego, and that helps like grow this dysfunctionality, and people take things personally, whatever. They don't focus on policy. So that kind of met my expectation. But what didn't meet my expectation was the conversations they were having in the Capitol. And they had like Spanish speakers even talking about immigrants' rights. Like I was just surprised to see that. This was back in 2014. I mean, hopefully they're still having that today. I would imagine they do, but you haven't been in so long. So that's what like kind of, opened my eyes to like, oh, they're actually having conversations that I just didn't think they were having in these spaces. And it was for like staffers and things like that. They call them like brown bag lunches. We have those in California too. Like different advocacy orgs will put on a brown bag like lunch. They provide lunches to staff and they'll talk about the issues that they're passionate about and yeah, help like educate the staff.
Could you please first start by explaining the process of what you would do when you began drafting um,
Oh, like
bills?
policy.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, it depends on the member you work for, their priorities. When I worked for Cotty, like she was very passionate about the environment. She ran on that. So we looked at those things. When I worked for another member, Alex Lee, he was a little more progressive. He's very passionate about housing policy. So it depends on like the ideas that they want to pursue. But basically, we have these committees, right? Policy committees, and you have an idea. So you have this idea, you draft the language. We work with Legislative Council in California, and they're basically all these attorneys that draft the actual language. As a humanities major, I'm not going to law school. I did have I took a con law class, constitutional law class. My professor really told me I should go to law school, just because it was fun learning about it and the case law and things like that. But I definitely did not want to commit. And also, it's just so expensive. But if you have the money, like, it's something that yeah, I probably would have considered it more. But I grew up poor. There's scholarships too. But yeah, so we work with these attorneys who are well versed in law and they know how to write law, right, with the legal language. And we tell them the idea. We have draft some policy to like try to get a start. And we work with them like, okay, we want to do X, Y, Z and we're looking at this section of code. Is this the right section of code, etc.? They help you draft that language, and we call it an RN. And that RN is served as like a basis for now we have language. This is what we want to do. Then we go to advocates. who may be interested in the space. And then we go to policy consultants to get what their thoughts on the bill before introducing it, just to make sure, one, like, are there any major red flags with this bill? What's the viability, right, of this bill getting passed? Or like if there's going to be major issues from a policy consultant, like then it can kind of reshape how we even want to move forward with this bill. Having the support from advocates, like, are we going to have a robust amount of support? Does someone want to sponsor a bill? And a sponsorship from an advocate can help with the bill process. Because when you have more backing from like advocates, it helps like push the idea forward more because then it shows like more public support. And that's kind of like the initial process in developing a bill. And then once it's introduced, it kind of goes through, you cross it at the desk. After COVID, we started emailing in the assembly. But then when I was in the state senate, because I worked there too for a year and a half, you still cross a bill at the desk, which I like doing because it's like it's kind of has a little, it's fun. Because this is how you do it. Like you get the bill, you go to the floor of the Senate, and then you cross like we call it bill jacket, and you cross it at the desk, which is the language from the RN. It has an RN in there from Ledge Council also. That's how we craft the bill in California, at least. It's probably different in DC. Yeah, and then it gets assigned to committees, and we kind of work on it from there. And there's always a lot of controversy with whatever bill you have. And there's just some controversial bills from the outgate or from the start. So yeah, but you work with a lot of different stakeholders, and it's a very uh, collaborative process. Most times. Sometimes it's not, and it's frustrating. And now I'm an advocate, right? So I'm on the outside. I'm not in the inside of the legislature anymore. So it's fun being on this side now, where like I lose some access to certain things I had before. But having the knowledge, the institutional knowledge, really helps me be a very like effective advocate, right, for my work.
If you had to give an estimate, what percentage of laws that you introduced eventually passed?
Oh God, I don't know. I mean, passed and signed, or just
Yeah,
passed?
and
Passed
signed.
and signed? Yeah, Newsom vetoed a few of my bills for really stupid reasons. Um, God, I don't know. I would probably, well, so Democrats have a pretty high success rate. So the culture in the legislature, members want to support other members or colleagues. It's a culture I don't like personally, because then there's really bad bills that get passed. But like that culture helps like the success rate. And like a lot of where places where the bills die is called appropriations committee. So if it has a fiscal impact, which like nearly every bill does. Fiscal impact meaning it has like a financial cost. It dies there quietly, and leadership gets involved. It's all politics, right? I got a percentage. I'll probably like say 70%. I probably got passed. Yeah, so it's a good amount. And then I get vetoed. Probably of the bills that made it to this, maybe a third got vetoed. So yeah, it probably drops it down to around 50, half the bills I worked on. So it's not bad. It's not too bad. We have a lot of laws we pass in the legislature in California. It's like 900 bills a year get signed or something. It's a lot. We're a full-time legislature. We're one of like a few states that have a full-time legislature. We call ourselves the Republic of California for a reason, right? We're the fourth largest economy. I think we might have gotten demoted to fifth again, but we're top five largest economy in the whole world, and we have 40 million people nearly. We're basically a country. And if the United States didn't have California, they would not be the economic superpower they are today. Like they would lose the number one status because we're fourth in the world without like so like without us, and we give the federal government $83 billion more in taxes than that we get in return. So we're subsidizing the federal government and all these like other states like Mississippi and things like that, where they love hating on California, but technically we're subsidizing them. And the federal government's trying to take money away from us. Like they're trying not to even give us money. Like Donald Trump has threatened to like withhold funds because we have like sanctuary policies, or he took money away from our high-speed rail, for instance, because he doesn't believe in public transit, things like that. And it's frustrating because again, we're giving $83 billion more already. So now he's trying to give us less money, which personally for me, I'm just like, let's not just give him more taxes. But yeah, that's a whole thing.
Now you mentioned that some of your laws were vetoed for, you said, very
Yeah.
stupid reasons. So what were
Yeah.
actually these reasons?
So, but Newsom, he would veto a lot of bills. I mean, he still does, and he'll say like cite financial costs. And in California, we have to pass a balanced budget. Again, like, so a lot of people who aren't familiar with California, they'll try to say, like, we're a state run amok. We have outrageous spending, whatever it is. But by per constitution, we actually have to pass a balanced budget. And that was passed by voters in whatever year it was. So we cannot pass a budget that's in the red. So I tell a lot of conservatives this, and they're very shocked. They don't believe me, but I'm like, it's in our constitution. We have a balanced budget requirement, and it's kind of interesting in a more progressive state, right, to have that requirement. But yeah, so we pass that budget every year. It's balanced. And he'll like, there's some bills that have a fiscal impact, as I mentioned, and he signs a lot of bills that have fiscal impacts. But he does try to group all these bills together, and we'll say he'll just veto like however many bills because they have a cumulative impact of like $20 billion, I think, one year, which is a lot of money. So he'll just veto that bill. And I don't know. California, we have a lot of money. I think we can spare some policy like impacts, but that was one reason that I didn't really wholly agree with. And but he did urge us to work through the budget process. And our budget making process, which is such an opaque process that I still can't fully grasp, even with all my years experience in the legislature. It's a very like kind of secretive. It's not a very transparent process. It's really unfortunate and an affront to a truly transparent democratic system with the way we kind of have our budget making process. But yeah, they do policy making in our budget too, and things like that. It's really interesting.
Yeah, I never knew that California had to have a balanced budget. Do you like having a balanced budget in California?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's a bad thing, but it's also like, I don't know. It kind of comes down to your thinking of like our kind of low, like, I don't know, how our economics work and whether we should be having a balanced budget every year. And yeah, you're burdening future generations, right, on these costs. But sometimes if you don't invest in certain things now, it's going to cost more money in the future. So like you're arguably, even if you pass a more balanced budget, if you're not making certain investments, like speaking about the climate crisis, right, and like grids, whatever it is, it's going to cost more money in the future to do these things. So it's just like, when do you want to spend that money? And I think having a very rigid, like it has to be balanced is not the right way to approach our budget. And it is. I have my biases. I know I do. I'm more progressive. But we could have more money. We can have more funding. Like another bill I worked on was the wealth tax, which was the first time we ever introduced in the California legislature, which was really fun. And I worked with Emmanuel Saiz, who's at UC Berkeley, a famous economist. He has a lot of work that helped with the book called Capital in the 21st Century by Thomas Piketty, which is a newer version of Capital from Karl Marx, Marxist theory. So he was really fun to work with because he's like on the frontier of this knowledge, right, in this space. And the wealth tax would allow us to have more money to spend too. So it's just like we kind of pit a lot of these really important priorities against each other and impose austerity on ourselves when I don't think in reality we really have to. Um, so yeah, we can have more money. There's more money there. It's just such a huge concentration of wealth in this country. And it's because we have capitalism run amok without any type of like regulation. Or as there's regulation on it, there's not like there isn't any, but there can be a lot more. And you have like Elon Musk who's trying to become the first trillionaire, which is insane. The person with $1 billion, that's way too much money for someone to have. Like if you had $1 every second, in your life, right? $1 million, you'll have it in 11 days. A billion, guess how long it is, John Lincoln?
I think I've
32
heard
years.
this before. Yeah.
Yeah, 32 years. I'm 33. So I would have just got my first billion. If I got $1 every second I was alive, I would have got become a billionaire just last year. And I'm 33 years old. So it's just like, why does a person need that much money? Billionaires, like they should not exist. I firmly believe we should abolish billionaires and we should have a cap. And a wealth tax would allow us to get there. The wealth tax I worked on did not abolish billionaires. We just imposed a tax rate on a certain amount of assets they had after like $50 million in assets. So it's like then we applied like whatever tax rate it was. I forget the exact rate, but a way you can abolish billionaires through policy as you have a wealth tax. And anyone with the 999,999,999, well, my 99s across the board, you oppose 100% tax beyond that rate. And that's very controversial because it runs counter to the ideas and ideals that we're taught as children and in this country about capitalism. And like it's a very hyper individualist like lens, and like people should be able to attain as much wealth as they can, whatever ideas they have, et cetera, et cetera. But it's just like it's very unethical. And I'm hoping the pendulum swings this way where we can actually abolish billionaires because then we could use that money for all these investments. Like, we could actually provide housing to people. If you whether you believe housing is a human right, we could provide like clean water, food for everyone, healthcare, all these different priorities for people to make our society better rather than having the concentration of wealth in these few pockets of society, which is arguably like detrimental to everything. And that's a huge reason why I wanted to work on policy too, because I grew up in a like poor area and I just kind of saw that impact. And it is, I mean, and there are conservatives who are poor and stuff. It just depends on like your orientation to the space. Like my parents, for instance, they're very conservative and they want to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, and that's like their thinking. But it's just not the world we live in today. Not everyone has boots to pull themselves up by, right? So I'm
Yeah.
hopeful.
Well, could you please briefly explain the arguments against having this wealth tax or abolition of billionaires?
Oh yeah, there's a lot. Obviously I don't agree with a whole lot of them, but yeah, their argument is basically like, people earn that money and they should have a right to attain as much wealth as they can. Because in a free society, in a truly free society, you should, oh, sorry, my cat. Neptune. In a truly free society, you should be able to, yeah, again, attain as much wealth as you humanly can with whatever ideas you have. Like with Jeff Bezos, for instance, he did come up with the idea for Amazon, right? And it has been a great tool for everyone to use to like be able to purchase things on the go, or like it's more convenient, and then it's the reason why it grew. And like people think like others should be rewarded for those ideas that they come up with that help make society more convenient, that everyone kind of votes with their dollars, etc., right? And that's their argument as to like, oh yeah, this person should have this much wealth. But from the other lens, you're just like, okay, great, you won capitalism. Like we should, like, you got this idea, you hit $1 billion, and that's why I'm like, in my opinion, like build them a park, let them have a statue saying I won capitalism. And then we could use that money. They're fine with a billion. You don't need more than $1 billion to spend. But it does run counter to this idea of like, okay, in like truly free society, like someone should be able to attain as much wealth as they can. Whereas like if you have a more communal perspective of like everyone in the society, it's just like you want to use that money to help everyone, uplift everyone, because there are people suffering, and the median household income in California is like 90,000, maybe 95. It's not a lot of money, right? And usually a household are two incomes. So that's the median. A median meaning it's in the middle. That's like true middle class. And when you have two incomes making 90, 95, that's like what, 45,000, 50 each. So it's just like it's not a lot of money. And like if you have someone with 100 or 1 billion, and I mean now what Elon Musk is at 400 billion, it's just like a grotesque amount of wealth. So yeah, that's where I kind of fall on that.
Mhm.
I don't know if you have thoughts about it, John Lincoln. I know you're still young, you're learning about all this, and the first time I'm kind of getting acclimated to this space. Again, when I was your age, I felt very different about this, right? I was more libertarian, which is like, it falls into the idea of like, you should be able to attain as much wealth as you can because that's your idea and you should be rewarded for it.
You work now at the ACLU, is that correct?
Yes, yeah, American Civil Liberties Union. It's a
Could you
great
please
organization.
explain how the organization functions?
Yeah, so we're a nonpartisan nonprofit. So nonpartisan meaning we don't take any sides, like we don't donate money to candidates and we don't endorse candidates for office. Our founding is basically we want to protect constitutional rights, regardless of their party affiliation. And our founding of ACLU was back in like 1920, I believe. and it was around free first speech, First Amendment rights, because people were speaking out against the war, shortly after World War One, and people were actually getting punished and they were getting put in prison in the United States of America, right? Like they were actually their political prisoners and they're getting put in jail for their speech. So ACLU was founded to protect that speech because in a free society, this is where I fall in the free society. You should be able to speak freely and have First Amendment rights, unfettered First Amendment rights. And there are limitations technically. You can't be like threatening to kill someone, things like that. Um, and like actually threatening someone, that's where you start getting a little limitation. But like being able to speak freely about your ideals, things like that, that's really important in a free society. And yeah, so that's how ACLU was founded. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who's a famous Supreme Court justice, actually used to work at the ACLU, and she argued a case, her first case at the Supreme Court representing the ACLU. I forget what the case was about, but she used to be one of our attorneys. And we started as an organization full of attorneys who are passionate about law and the Constitution and want to safeguard these constitutional rights because they're constantly under attack and they always have been. I mean, they're very under attack now, but it's like it's always has been like that, unfortunately. And Angela Davis, she has a book called Freedom is a Constant Struggle. And it's like we have these rights embedded in our founding documents, but you have to continually fight to safeguard these rights because it's constantly going to be under attack from these politicians that don't understand the founding documents. So that's our founding and the way we operate now. We have ACLU National, who focuses on DC and combating Trump. We have like, in his first term, we had 437 lawsuits against him to try to negate a lot of the unconstitutional things he was doing. I think we were successful in like 70% of our cases against him, which is a lot. I don't know how many cases we have now against him. But yeah, so we kind of fight against like unfettered executive acting out of bounds or constitutional violations. And in California, we focus on the legislature here in state policy. And as now my position at the ACLU here is to work against bills or work for bills to help like combat like problematic issues. I primarily work on criminal justice issue. That's mine. I was working on First Amendment as well, but I had to give that up sadly because I'm very passionate about First Amendment rights. But now I'm just doing CJ, and that's again we very highly respect work-life balance at ACLU, which I love. It's a great organization. So that's what I do. And I have to register as a lobbyist. Although I identify as an advocate, they're good lobbyists. Before getting into this politics world, I used to think all lobbyists had no souls and were evil people. But then I learned they're good lobbyists that advocate for good causes. And these are my biases, John Lincoln, right? Some people may think like I'm an evil lobbyist working for ACLU. It's just we all have biases. Um, but yeah, there's a lot of lobbyists that advocate for more like progressive things and also more conservative. But I'm in what you call an in-house lobbyist. So I work inside, like for the ACLU, and I just do their issues. They're a contract lobbyists who will contract with certain organizations, certain interest groups, and they'll basically do the lobbying for that interest group. And in my opinion, they don't have soul. They're a little more like they almost treat it like they go to the highest bidder and they'll just kind of argue whatever points to help push their issue forward. It's a very interesting dynamic. I don't know if I'll ever be a contract lobbyist,
Mm.
but yeah, I do feel comfortable being a lobbyist for an organization I wholeheartedly believe in, like the ACLU.
Yeah, well, you said you're very passionate about the First Amendment. What do you
Hmm.
think about this example of someone using their freedom of speech to protest against someone that they don't like at their own funeral? Yeah.
Oh, that's like a Westboro Baptist Church. Are you familiar with them?
No, I don't think so. What are they?
They're like a very ultra right conservative Christian, like evangelical kind of group. They're fringe, right? Fringe group. But yeah, they protest at like certain military and they'll have like these grotesque signs and it's very disrespectful. Um, however, it's our First Amendment, right? And even if we don't agree with the speech, you like if you don't protect all speech, even those that you don't agree with, like then you're not being consistent with the value of the First Amendment. Unless they're imposing, again, they're like imposing a serious threat, bodily harm to someone, it's a different story. But if they're protesting with, despicable signs that is just very disrespectful, that should be safeguarded. And again, not everyone's comfortable with that, but it is part of our, like that is a critical component to a free society. So personally, I'm okay with that. Yeah. And I don't know if we helped the Westboro Baptist Church at ACLU. I'd have to look. I don't know off the top of my head, but yeah, we help protect like First Amendment rights in that regard. Yeah. And we have a controversial case, the ACLU. We actually, this happened in 2014. I forget what year. It was like during Black Lives Matter kind of too. And there's a white supremacist neo-Nazis marched in Charlottesville in Virginia. And they had like tiki torches and said these like really racist things like I don't know, talking about like their white pride. Anyways, the ACLU, we actually fought to get them permitted to be able to march in the streets because the city council didn't even want to permit their march. And it was ACLU National that did that. And the ACLU was under attack from like more progressive groups, right? And things like that. But in all actuality, we have to safeguard everyone's First Amendment rights, even if they're the Ku Klux Klan. And again, like like, I don't agree with anything the KKK represents and stands for or anything of that nature, but it is important to safeguard these people's ability to march in their streets, even if you don't agree with them. It was controversial because they had weapons, they had guns. So at the ACLU after that, we did amend our policy and saying we will not try to advocate for permits for people if they're going to be carrying weapons. Because that's now you're getting into a line where you're threatening people, right? And you have these guns, where it's just like, yeah, it does go beyond like your First Amendment, right? Like you're starting to like try to threaten people. And that's where there's that nuance. So, and they had guns at that march. It was a very controversial part of our past, but it does represent our values and wanting to safeguard First Amendment rights for everyone. Like Charlie Kirk, horrible human being, said despicable things. But he had a right to say those things, and he shouldn't be like stopped from going to a college campus. He shouldn't be like prevented from speaking. Um, and like Milo Yiannopoulos, who was another guy at UC Berkeley, he tried to speak there, and their students protesting to make him stop and like prevent him from speaking. That's not how a free society works. They should, even if they say despicable things, you don't agree with them, like you cannot stop someone from their right from speaking whatever those values are. And that's where you have a divide with like more progressives, right? And like these, I'm a civil libertarian. I still identify as a civil libertarian, which has these values of people being able to express themselves, have bodily autonomy in all regards, whatever. And that First Amendment right is important in that regard.
So I noticed that you mentioned um, freedom of speech should be protected as long as it does not cause bodily harm. But what about emotional harm? Because what if it makes
Yeah,
someone really sad or depressed?
I know. It sucks.
How do
Yeah,
you deal with that?
yeah, no, it's true. It's a real thing. There's hate speech, right? Yeah, it's messy, man, and it's sad, and people should they should protect themselves. But then if you start passing laws to prevent this type of speech, yeah. I don't agree with that. ACLU does not agree with that, because you cannot be legislating people's speech and their thoughts. Like you just can't. Again, if you have a government control the way you think, right? You don't want to live in a government like that. And there are ideas like I will say like consensually like there's consensus around like what we believe are despicable ideals, right? Like xenophobia, racism, like those are just like totally it's hateful, right? Yeah, it's gross, it's grotesque. But when you start trying to legislate it and saying like they can't have this speech and because people get hurt about the emotional harm, people have committed suicide, right? Um, we, but you just cannot like legislate that speech away. There has to be other avenues and like trying to help people with mental health services and like try to invest in that, right? And things of that nature. There are other avenues to help address that rather than trying to like prevent certain speech. And if you're on Twitter or whatever social media, you can block people. You don't have to like kind of expose yourself to that all the time. But there are people that are just like targeted, and it's unfortunate. And that's when you start getting to harassment. So if you're starting to get harassed by someone, that actually there's repercussions for that. So that's why I'm like, we already kind of have laws in place where you're getting targeted constantly, and like, again, they're trying to threaten you. You have a legal avenue to work within to help prevent that. But yeah, mental health services should be invested in. But yeah, it's a real thing, emotional harm. It's rough. It's tough.
Yeah, well, this topic is really interesting.
Yeah.
Um, Moving on, right now you said that you're in grad school. What exactly
Mhm.
motivated you to continue your um, education, I guess?
Yeah, so my work-life balance is a lot better at the ACLU, and as I mentioned, and in the legislature, we're just like so overworked. Um, our offices aren't as big as they should be. Our budgets are constrained because there's a proposition passed by voters. And God, whatever year it was, I think that's when we passed term limits in 86. Anyways, it restricted our budgets and based on inflation of what it was at the time. So now you have these budgets that are constrained, and that's what created like a heavier workload for us because one, we couldn't hire more staff, and two, the pay was lower. So then there was a lot of turnover. It's really unfortunate. And I said it like many times. We unionize in the legislature. They're going to start unionizing next summer. But we had to get a law passed to unionize. And I've been on record. I've spoken to media like How Matters, SF Chronicle about how the state is exploiting our passion for public service. And it's a true thing because it is being exploited. So I made it hard and difficult. I've always wanted to get my master's degree after I finished my undergrad, but I also had to take care of myself. And I didn't want to overextend, and I wanted to work on policy so much, so I stayed. I just think I decided not to go to school. But now, since I have the time, a bit more time, I decided I can take on this endeavor. And it's great. I am getting a master's in public policy and administration. It's a hybrid program at Sacramento State, right here, and yeah, it's a great program, and yeah, I enjoy being in it. There's great faculty, and it's what I do for a living. So I just kind of want to learn more about kind of the craft and expand because you could always learn more, right? I remember I had a professor in my undergrad tell me once he got his graduate degree or maybe his doctorate, the main thing he took away from it was that he knows nothing. And it really resonated with me because I'm just like, oh, like usually when people get a higher degree, like they learn a lot, right? But when you learn a lot, you also realize you know nothing. So it's like a paradox, right? It's like counterintuitive. But it's a really great like approach to have to education. Because like when someone acts like they know everything, they know nothing, right? And that's my mentality too. I could always grow and learn. And this graduate degree is helping me do that. Even though I work in this space, I've been doing it for a decade, right? There's still a lot I can learn. So that's why I wanted to get my graduate degree. But it's not for everyone, right? But it is for me.
This idea that you know nothing, does it ever frighten you? Because in a couple decades, you might look back on what you're doing right now and realize I was doing everything completely wrong, and you might have a completely different worldview, like when you're 50 or so. Does that ever frighten you?
No, it does not actually. Um, yeah, we changed like, and I'm different. I'm much different than who I was 5 years ago. So like, if we stay static, right, it shows you're not growing and learning. So actually, I would not want to be like, I don't have like, I'm not afraid of it. I embrace that because I'm like, we should be changing. We should be growing. Um, there are certain ideals I have that haven't changed. I have like really fundamental beliefs about, like we shouldn't be killing people, like death penalty shouldn't be, right? Like having state sanctioned murder is something, right? But like you start learning more and like as science develops, right? And like we learn more about certain things that we know today in the future, like you should always be open to change. So having that malleability is important to being a functional human being in this society. So yeah, should never be too rigid in our thoughts we have today and like open to new ideas. It's really important. So yeah, I embrace that.
Of course, but I'm just saying that as someone who's working towards policies that are making a significant impact on people, what if
Mhm.
you suddenly look back on your policies and wish you hadn't made them? I don't know.
Yeah, that's a
Does that
risk, man.
exist?
I mean, right now, I don't think there's been like, yeah, I haven't experienced that yet, but it can happen in the future. It might change a little. Um, yeah, you never know. So, but yeah, I mean, I definitely don't feel that now, but I have a biased lens right now, like who I am right now, right? So I'm like, yeah, I don't think it will happen, but yeah, it can. And I could look back, I'm like, what was I doing? But yeah, yeah. So I guess you're asking if there's a fear of that happening.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I'm like, that would suck. I hope it doesn't. I mean, I hope I don't become like very conservative in the future. Not that there's anything wrong with people who are conservative. I think everyone wants the best for society. They just have a different way of doing it. Um, but yeah, I would be very surprised if I end up being like, oh, why was I working on the wealth tax? Why was I trying to abolish billionaires? Like, like, I would be shocked. But again, like you have to be open, right? Or just like, okay, I can possibly, maybe, I don't know. But I would be very shocked. That's why I don't know anything for certain, like your future, right? And yeah, it's hard to know things for certain.
Yeah. Well, anyways, this has been a great conversation. Um, before we leave, do you wish to leave the audience with any last words?
Oh, yeah, no, definitely like yeah, people just being more engaged is something I think is important for a productive society. Like there's a lot of apathy right now. And I meet people my age and I feel like a lot of us have like similar ideals that are a bit more like that can help transform our society for the better. But they're just so like detached and apathetic because of just how the system has not been working. And I really hope people can eventually become more engaged. And it doesn't have to become your life, like, with me, like making it my career and things like that. But I just hope people can just have a different attitude and orientation to our system of governance and politics. Not be afraid to talk about it because it can create confrontation. We all like don't agree with each other, right? 100% of the time. Yeah, and I don't agree with 100% my views that I had 3 years ago because I change a bit, right? But like just not being afraid to kind of approach these topics is something I hope people can do in their daily lives and just again being more engaged in like their local governments and states and kind of federal, being sure they vote. And just kind of normalizing that a bit more is something I kind of hope for. I'm hopeful for that world because I feel like if there's more people engaged, um, it'll, we can improve our society for the better. So I really hope that happens. I'm not as jaded yet. I'm in my 30s. I don't know, maybe in my 50s, John Lincoln. When you're in your 30s, I'm in my 50s. I might be more jaded, but I hope I'm not. So yeah, I am very hopeful about our future. And yeah, I believe we are going to transform our society for the better, even if it takes until I'm in my 70s. I know I'm going to see it in my lifetime. I don't know how old I'll be, but it will happen. So yeah.
Yeah, well, that's very inspiring, and I'm glad to see someone who's optimistic, who's working in government.
Thanks, John Lincoln. Yeah, and
Yeah,
it's great that you're so interested in this issue at such a young age. I love that. I love seeing young people engaged. So you're giving me that hope, John Lincoln.
great. Well, once again, thank you so much for joining me on this show.
Thanks, John Lincoln. Yeah, of course. I hope you have a good rest of your day.
You too. Goodbye.
All right.